Hey, folks, I have a really interesting interview for you today. It's with a friend of mine who I haven't actually had a conversation with in more than a half a decade, it feels like. So Mark and I met way back in the day. I think I was actually working at Adobe.
That's right. Time. That's where we met.
It was like ages ago. I was working at Adobe, and Mark was gracious enough to invite me along on one of his adventures, which I think he's going to talk about during this interview. But Marc Silber, he's the executive producer at Advancing Your Photography. He's a photographer. He's a guy that is doing all sorts of stuff in terms of helping photographers get inspired and get out there using your gear rather than, just kind of looking at the camera bag sitting by the front door. Marc Silber.
That's a good way of putting it.
Welcome to the show, man. It's good to see you again.
Thank you, Frederick. Yeah, we go back to the last decade.
Right?
Way back.
It's crazy. And you look exactly the same.
Well, that's good to know.
You look exactly the same as you did,
That's because it's not actually me. I'm just holding a photograph up here from 10 years ago.
It's that California living. That's what it is.
Surfing is a good thing.
I love it. Well, man, that's good. And congratulations on all the things you're doing. I've seen, like we were talking about before I started recording, I've seen your progress from when we first started interacting to today, and you've been kind of building kind of an empire over there.
It's a little empire, and it's moving in the right direction, which is always the right thing.
Well, tell me about it. Tell me about Advancing Your Photography and Silber Studios and the Marc Silber Show and all that stuff. What is the empire?
Yeah, basically, I guess that kind of leads into what we were going to talk about too, which is transitioning from being a still photographer to why am I now shooting so much video?
Yeah.
It really kind of goes like this. The story is that, as a still photographer, I also enjoy teaching photography. And no matter how big the room was, there's only so many people that you can talk to at a given time.
Yeah.
And, what happened is in 2007, Robert Scoble.
I know that guy. Yeah.
Scoble invited me to go out on a photo walk. And I actually didn't know what that meant. So I had to Google it, and I found out that a photo walk is where he would shoot the video and take a photographer out, and we'd walk and talk. And essentially, I had done so many workshops that I just gave a workshop out while I was shooting. And it was, it kind of took off.
Yeah.
He had a very popular blog and it got all this traction. All of a sudden the light bulb went off. I went, wow, instead of talking to one room full of people, I can talk to people all over the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was kind of my first aha. And the second aha was, when I do workshops, often I quote different photographers. I would quote Ansel Adams, for instance. Mm-hmm. One of the big things that he talks about is visualization. And there's a little section in his first book about visualization, like one paragraph. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to hear Ansel talking about visualization? What does it actually mean? Yeah. So I reached out and got to know the Ansel Adams family. And we ended up doing a video shoot initially in Yosemite at Glacier Point with Michael Adams, Ansel's son.
Yeah.
That video is online. In fact, I just recently re-edited it with a whole section on Ansel Adams' breakthrough about visualization in 1927.
Very cool.
This is where he was climbing up and taking a photograph of Half Dome. Mm-hmm. And you have to kind of think in terms of what was photography like back then in 1927. It was basically a recording device. It was like instead of etching, we used a photograph. Yeah. So it wasn't like an art form yet. It was considered still just kind of a way of representing what was already there. So Ansel was trying to break out of that. And he shot the picture of Half Dome with a yellow filter. And then he visualized, what would it be like if the sky was really dark? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he switched to a red filter, captured that deep, dark sky, and that was the beginning of the Ansel Adams style of photography.
That's so cool. That is so cool. But so you kind of glossed over this a little bit.
Yeah.
Was it as easy as, you know what? I feel like meeting the Ansel Adams clan there. Let me go make a phone call, and suddenly you're in Yosemite with those. How did that happen?
How did that happen?
Yeah.
No, actually, that took months and months and months of building a relationship. I initially got to know Ansel's grandson, Matthew, and that took going through different layers of gatekeepers, because these kinds of people are friendly, but they are certainly protected.
Of course, yeah.
And so after maybe 3 or 4 meetings with the grandson, he said, you should really talk to my dad. And then he introduced me to Michael. And from there, again, building trust, which is something to me that's an integral part of the videos that I do, is allowing people to sort of feel like themselves,
Yeah.
And so I feel like my job is more than, anybody can point a camera at somebody. It's how do you get them to open up and really talk about the good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting below the surface. And, I got to officially thank you for introducing me to the Ansel Adams family. We went down to, what was it, Carmel by the Sea, right?
Carmel by the Sea, where I live now.
Yeah. Oh, you're down there now. Okay.
I'm a few miles away from where Ansel Adams lived. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. And we you have a video clip or something from
Should we show it?
I don't believe that I've ever seen this video clip. Right?
Nobody has. Okay. Actually, this was left in the cutting room floor. We never used it. So this was a little clip of the shoot that we did at Ansel's house. And this is Michael Adams showing us how Ansel's enlarger worked, showing both of us.
Wow. Well, let's take a look at that now.
We're back in the darkroom, Ansel Adams' darkroom, and we're looking at his enlarger. Michael, can you give us a tour and tell us what this is all about?
I can give you a pretty good idea. This is an enlarger that runs on railroad tracks. And in the distance here, you're looking at where the image would be projected. This would be the slide holder. In this case, it's an 8x10 holder for an 8x10 negative, which would be put in the camera. The light source for this is an amazing array of bulbs. We won't turn it on because it would blast everything. The interesting thing is that every bulb has its own switch, which could be controlled. So you would have control of the light source itself, as well as your exposure and the work that you would do with the print or the enlargement that you were doing. It's an amazing thing. It's sort of a home-built operation. He had one of these in his darkroom in San Francisco, and when he moved down here, I think some of the basics of this camera are a part of it.
So there you go. Those 2 young kids that he was talking to 8 years ago.
I think I had a few less gray hairs then.
Hey, mine were, I got to say it's about the same. It kind of hit a plateau. I don't think you can get any grayer.
It starts getting brown or black again, right?
Maybe it'll be a Benjamin Button thing, and I'll just get darker.
There you go. You hit the wall and just go into reverse.
Exactly.
But
this was my starting point. This is what got me going was, okay, so, and then after I got to know Michael, he gave me a reel of unreleased footage from Ansel. And he kind of anointed me as the official keeper of the videos for the Ansel Adams Gallery. And if you go to anseladams.com and you search for videos on Ansel Adams, you'll see a whole section of videos. I have about 6 or 7 of them are up there. So I'm pretty proud of the fact to be the guy that produced, these various videos about Ansel Adams.
That is really cool. I mean, that's what an honor, right? Because in the photography world, even today with, these new toys, the Ansel Adams work is still kind of the pinnacle of landscape photography in black and white and attention to detail and the kind of meticulous darkroom work that he became known for, and the zone system and all these other things, right? It's Ansel Adams. What else can you say?
It's Ansel Adams. You know what? Just to kind of touch on that for a moment, because this resonates with what I'm doing, is that he was unique in that he was generous in sharing his knowledge. And, if you look around at photographers in that era, let's take Edward Weston, phenomenal photographer, but there really isn't that much out there about how he did what he did and why he did it and teaching others. And that's what made Ansel so amazing is he did workshops. He wrote, 5 books, the basic photo series. And then when I found these videos, it was like, wow, eureka.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what got me started. And from there, I ended up shooting every week and doing a show focused on one photographer after another.
I love it. Yeah, I remember, I don't even want to say how many years ago it was, but I remember having a physical book. You remember those? A physical book.
Yeah.
And the first one I got in the collection was the print.
Yes.
Yeah, so I got the print, and of course, once you get one of them, you got to go get the other ones.
You got to go back and get the camera, which is actually the first in the series, then the negative and the print. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's just a beautifully written, like I said, meticulously detailed.
Scientific.
Yeah, all the way through. And when I first read through it, I understood maybe 10% of it, so you had to go read it again and again.
It takes a dictionary. He was, here's the amazing thing about Ansel. I was just at an opening with his son, and he gave a bio. Ansel didn't go past the 8th grade.
Wow. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, he basically was homeschooled after that. What gave Ansel, his grounding was music. He was going to be a concert pianist. And he took that same degree of discipline and precision and took it to photography. Anyway, that's where I got started. It wasn't bad. I hit the bar.
That's quite the start. I mean, and you, when we first met, you were just jumping, like we said, you were just jumping into this stuff, and you're with contagious enthusiasm, as you still have to this day. Yeah. What were you doing before this? What were you doing before you got bitten by this, like I like to say on the show, the radioactive spider, I
was doing what most photographers are doing, which is, selling my work. I was selling to magazines. I was selling at shows.
Cool.
I was doing portrait sessions. I had a career before that, actually, a completely different career as a management consultant.
Oh, wow.
And I sold my consultancy to my partners in 2004, expressly with the idea that I was going to become a pro photographer.
Wow.
So I basically, by the time this Ansel Adams show came around, I'd been kind of pounding the pavement.
That is great.
And I realized this isn't really, I didn't see it happening fast enough.
Like the pro photographer career track?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me to get what I wanted, not just for myself, but again, I love teaching. And I didn't see where that was necessarily going to open those doors.
Mm-hmm.
But if I kind of found a convergence of the two, which I did, in terms of video and photography, all of a sudden the doors really opened up.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Let's transition to that convergence of the two. And, your transition from being the straight kind of still photographer and now into the world of motion and video and all the goodness and headaches that brings, right?
Exactly.
Not
and it
all
definitely
rainbows
is
and
both.
unicorns. So tell me about that transition. What made you move from still to primarily video?
Well, it was really just because the show was taking off. Mm-hmm. And, I became a producer of video before I knew how to shoot a camera, if that's understandable.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally I wasn't one of these guys that carried a video camera around and shot videos of my kids. I just was a still guy.
Yeah.
So I'd never touched editing software. I never really worked with a video camera. So I ended up having to pick this stuff up on the fly really fast because you can't produce a show and not know how the stuff works.
Right.
I've tried it and you end up with mediocre results because the guy over there shooting the camera, you got to make sure he's doing what he's supposed to be doing and your editors are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It all comes together. And the only way I know how to do that is to get enough skill myself. Mm-hmm. That I can do it myself.
You have to have a vision. You have to have a vision, and you have to have a vision that's grounded in physics and reality, so that you know what the capabilities are and what the tools are, so that your vision can leverage those things, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I'll give you an example of what you don't want to do. So after I shot this show with Ansel, with Michael Adams, I thought, well, I don't want it to appear that I'm just dealing with last century photographers. So I reached out to Chase Jarvis.
I've heard of him.
You've heard of him. A lot of people have heard of Chase. And, he said, thankfully, he said, sure, let's do it. Even though I hadn't even, gotten the show rolling or anything. So I hired a guy who put his camera on autofocus. We were shooting in San Francisco at the outside the Palace Legion of Honor. So he puts it on autofocus. Uh-oh. And guess what?
Hunting?
It focused. No, it wasn't even that. That would have been okay. Better. It ended up focusing on the background.
Oh.
And Chase and I are out of focus. And I'm like, oh no, this is bad.
Yeah. You can't save that. You can't save it.
There was no saving it. And so Chase was gracious enough to say, hey, Mark, come up to my studio in Seattle. We'll just reshoot the whole thing. But that taught me a really valuable lesson. I can't just, like if I'm shooting as a photographer, even if I have assistants working with me, obviously I'm the guy that's got to be responsible for what's in the frame.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all learn those lessons. I had a similar, and I actually even wrote a blog post about this several years ago, but it was around when people misrepresent their skill level.
Oh, yeah.
And then you hire them based on what they said they can do, and then they fail on the job, and then the ultimate responsibility falls on you.
Guess what?
Yeah, and you look like an idiot because your work looks like crap, right?
Well, that's the thing. I learned that was scorched into the inside of my head.
Yeah.
That, I, as a producer and a director, I don't care who's doing what. Ultimately, it's my name that everybody's going to see.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They don't know about this other dude that you just hired, like you and I have, and they don't care because you and I are the ones that are bringing them the final product. So that actually, that really drove me to learn as much as I could about shooting and editing quickly. And the thing that I found as a director, if I didn't know how to edit, I don't think I would get the results that I've gotten, because really when I'm shooting and doing an interview, I'm editing it in my head. Mm-hmm. So there's certain things that I look for. For instance, I'm really looking for the sparks. You can be talking to somebody and they can be answering your questions and the words sound okay, but you can tell by their expression they don't really have passion in it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, we're not going to use that. We're not going to use, oh, wow. And then all of a sudden the eyes light up and bells ring, and you can feel the resonance. You've hit pay dirt, and your audience is going to feel it too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I like to do is watch those documentaries on Netflix or whatever, in particular, the ones on astronomy and cosmology, where they're talking about black holes and, the moon's around Jupiter and all this. And you can tell when they're editing or when they record these, each scientist that does their little vignette and they talk about, Europa is this, whatever, when they're talking about it, they always end on something impactful and salacious.
Exactly.
Like Enceladus is covered in ice and there may be life underneath it. And then they cut. And boom, they go into something else and show the planet. Those kinds of techniques for me at least, keep me riveted and with some sort of forward momentum rather than having no momentum and just sort of placid.
You don't want it to be flat.
Right.
You want it to carry you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of editing, because, you shoot that stuff and that might have been one little, 30-second segment out of a 2-hour shoot. And so the editor has to be able to pick that stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So when you're on one of these shoots, like a typical interview, say it's a one-person interview, you're sitting down, What does it look like logistically or from a gear standpoint? Are you miking people up? Are you using a shotgun mic? What kind of camera? Are you using red cameras or smaller cameras? What's your flow?
Yeah, my go-to camera, first of all, is a 5D Mark III, because that sensor is exactly the same size as a 35 millimeter film strip.
Right, yeah.
So you're getting this beautiful look out of this camera. I also shoot stills, so it's nice to have the same piece of equipment, be able to do double duty. And I've done that. In fact, the other day, when I was shooting at the Ansel Adams opening, I shot a bunch of stills and then just flipped it over and started shooting video. But our typical setup is 2 cameras, usually one tight on the subject who I'm interviewing, and then a shot of both of us so we can cut back and forth. Typically, they're on tripods, although we shot some recently where we were shoulder mount. There's pluses and minuses about that. Yeah. On one hand, it's kind of nice to have the fluidity and then the naturalness, but that added motion it's really
distracting. It could be distracting.
It can be distracting, and different viewers have different tolerances. I've come to learn. So if you're putting something out there to a wide audience, you kind of have to go to the safe ground, and I think tripods.
And not that either one is right or incorrect or correct, but it speaks to the formality of the piece too, right?
True.
Well, if you're sitting down with Michael Adams or some other person of note, it's more formal to have two chairs there. You're sitting there, nice, unobtrusive background, and you're having an adult conversation with them. It seems more informal, which may be the goal of the piece, but it seems more informal if you're walking through a park having a conversation with this person, right? It's just little slight nuance differences in there.
Yeah, the only time it's really now I'm sort of moving into another series, which is out shooting with photographers. I started with myself out shooting the iconic Bixby Bridge in Big Sur.
Okay,
we've all seen it in ads. It's used all the time. Yeah, and I've shot that bridge a lot, and I went on a shoot just recently to kind of show what it was like for me to get the shot. And there, it would be impossible to drag a tripod around because I'm moving all the time.
Sure.
And due to the nature of the piece, that fits. That's like we're out in the field, we're moving around. That works really well. But back to the typical setup to answer your question. So generally, those 2 cameras will use a very large softbox and then a couple of small soft boxes just to kind of fill in. Almost always, that's kind of the go-to setup. And lavaliers,
very large to light both people, and then one softbox on either person?
Pretty much. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much. I mean, it depends on what. Like, if we're shooting in a room where there's already a lot of light, obviously that's modified. But we use daylight. So these are basically daylight balanced fluorescence. And, it has a nice look. We always capture audio separately on an audio recorder. I use the Zoom H5. It's a good, reliable recorder. We plug lavaliers either directly into the Zoom, or sometimes, again, if we're walking around, we'll use a wireless. Yeah. I'm not crazy about wireless because it's just one more piece of equipment.
I agree. Yeah.
To have transmission problems or something. So I'd rather
batteries.
Just batteries and, Bob Holmes, who we did a series of videos with, just made this point about equipment. And it's just a logical, obvious thing, but we all miss this point, which is the more equipment you have, the more stuff you've got to deal with, the more things that can go wrong.
You're right.
So I'm I kind of like a really simple studio that I can move around easily. I can put on a plane. I can go to New York with it. I can go anywhere.
Agree. I totally 100% agree with that. Yeah. The whole less is more thing. And if you look at the less is more, our less in 2016, as we record this, our less is way more than people had a decade ago that were doing more complicated work than what we're doing.
Completely. That's the amazing thing about, our modern stuff. So that's pretty much it. And then we'll shoot. And of course, we edit in as much B-roll as we have available from the photographer. If, like in Chase's video, he gave us basically a hard drive full of him shooting all over the world. So that was an awesome opportunity to just edit this stuff in.
Fantastic.
It gives it more depth. And then we obviously put in as many of their photographs as we can.
Yeah. And when you say we put in, what does that look like on the post-production side? Is it the kind of the stereotypical executive producer sitting over the shoulder of the editor saying, no, let's go with this shot and put that here? Or is it more like in my world, we have an editor for This Week in Photo, but for an interview like this, I'm going to edit it. And I'm sitting there, in front of the TV, putting it together with my headphones on,
Yeah, that's how I do it. I mean, to me, if I'm not working the controls myself, it's going to get lost. Like, it can be that split second of where you cut.
Yes.
And I don't want to have to. So I do all the rough cutting. This has been true for years. I cut. I'm not really trying to massage the cuts perfectly. And I'm not fine tuning it, but I'll do all the rough editing to make a story. Because really, at the end of the day, a video is a story. It has a message. It has a certain theme to it, and you want the viewer to come away with that story.
Yeah.
And editing is largely throwing stuff away.
Yeah. And having the ability to do that, right?
and you're in love with this certain section. But one of the things I try to do is, there might be a reason I'm in love with it, but is the viewer really going to care? Because maybe they're talking about an esoteric camera or a photographer that I happen to think is pretty cool. But then I think in terms of, I look at it, usually I'll do the rough edit and then just trying to put it all there. And I'm not thinking how long it is or whatever. I just want to kind of cut away all the stuff that doesn't really make sense. And then I'll go through it again and kind of looking at it from the viewpoint of being a viewer. And I try to do this the minute it just doesn't seem on point or there isn't really anything I can take away from it, I cut it.
Yeah. Much like when I'm cleaning out my closet once a year. Like have I worn that in this last year? No. Goes to the
See,
Goodwill.
my wife does that for me. I have an automatic disposal system. If it's not being, you're right. It's the same thing. It's just, kind of paring it down to, does this mean something? I look at it like this. Will I bring value to the viewer? Are they going to be educated by this particular point or not?
Right. Yeah.
And
Does it add to the story? Does it add to the story? No, speaking of story, one of the things I wanted to touch on, we put it in our sort of pre notes that we were going to talk about, is this idea of visual storytelling. And in fact, I've talked about this on TWiP a fair amount, and in terms of there's a litany of amazing photos that just come by every day. We're becoming numb to it. On Instagram, there's these amazing photos that you just kind of look at and, oh yeah, that's nice. And you swipe to the next one. And maybe if you're lucky, you like it or thumbs up it or whatever. Right. But very rarely do I see a story, even with still photos, even within one frame, a story. Whereas, we've seen the shots of the rickety pier with, black and white, long exposure, we've seen that, but then what's the story of that? There's no story other than it being a good picture. So tell me about that. Like you like to, like you were just describing, play into that idea of visual storytelling. How does that play into your work?
Well, that to me is why I fell in love with video, because for that exact reason. If you're a photojournalist, and you're documenting, you can then have that sequential story going on. But most of the time, we're only seeing one image. So I fell in love with video because it was like, whoa, look at all the layers I've got to work with here. Yeah. I've got a timeline that I can tell this story with. I've got other visuals that I can bring into it. I've got music that I can bring into it. I've got graphics, I've got color, I've got all these new elements besides just that one frame. But I also found that because, my grounding as a photographer, I mean, look, they call the position in a movie production director of photography.
Mm-hmm.
It is a photographer. You're shooting at 24 frames a second. You have 24 opportunities per second to get it right or not. And you look at some of the most beautiful films are just from a photographic standpoint, they draw you in even before you really get the message. Yeah. So all those things are what really pulled me into video. And one of the things that I love to do is to edit. I love editing. I find it a very relaxing, sort of a enjoyable, even if you have to go through lots and lots of footage, because it's putting that story together. Because really, I've come away from shoots kind of scratching my head and wondering if I had anything there, and then you start to pull away the kind of the non-essential parts, and all of a sudden you sort of realize you've got something, which is a different experience as a still photographer. I pretty much know from the moment I press the shutter if this is going to be a great image or not.
Right.
You know that, you feel it. But video is a little different because you've got all these other aspects, and it sort of has to be nurtured and brought to. You
got to synthesize it. It's kind of like my friend Renee Robin. She's a photographer and a compositing artist. So when she goes out, she's shooting pieces and ingredients for the final piece, and then she gets it all together, and she'll synthesize the disparate pieces into something amazing. And it's kind of the same thing with video, right? Because you're capturing raw material that by itself is not that remarkable, and it takes that talent to kind of synthesize everything together into that visual story. Kind of like Rumpelstiltskin. Exactly. You remember Rumpelstiltskin? That fable? Yeah, the gnome that was weaving gold from straw. You're kind of doing that.
There you go. No, it is, and it's because it's so deep that you have to make those layers all work together. And of course, that's also true in still photography. It's just, to me, it's more impactful only because you have so many more tools and outlets to tell your story with.
Well, let's talk about those tools as we wrap this up. So you have there's a ton of tools out there, right? So you're shooting with the 5D Mark III. There's mirrorless cameras. I shoot with mirrorless. There's drones. There's DJI has the Osmo, which is stabilized 4K footage. You could go upscale and go with 4K red, or 8K red. There's all these different tools out there. How do photographers make the choice of how to jump into this stuff? In fact, in this interview, which is we're going to edit, we're using webcams over the internet with Skype, right? So there's another viable option. How do you make the choice of what tools to use?
That's a really good question. I think that's an age-old question in photography. I am not a gearhead. I love equipment. But what I tend to do is get something that works. And I think that's the choice. Find a workable setup that works for you. Because the truth is, you could shoot a great production in any of those cameras you mentioned. Yeah. You could go to a mirrorless. You could shoot in 4K. Do you need it is really the real question.
Sure. Yeah.
Is it a viable opportunity for you? If it is, great, go for it. But I think what's more important is finding the right equipment that you can become so familiar with that it's just second nature. And I think if you get that stabilized and you know what the equipment will do and you're comfortable with it and it's like rock solid, then you can go from there. But the wrong thing to do is if you keep switching equipment around, you're never going to have that sense of certainty of this is what this camera will do, this is what the final output will be, this is what my audio will do. So my best recommendation is find a good setup, stick with it, really learn it, become totally confident with it, and then add from there if you want to.
Love it. Sage advice. Marc.
It's practical advice too.
It is sage and practical. Where, and I'll put these links, and we've been showing, the lower third URLs as this interview plays. And when I say we, I mean me, because I'm editing this.
That's the pleasant we. I'm not going to have my hands on this. I wouldn't mind editing it though, but you're probably not going to let me. That's okay.
No, you can edit it.
Sometimes I got to sit back and be the passenger.
You can totally edit this if you want. That would be totally great.
Go ahead.
Or maybe we should both edit it and see what result we come out with at the end. How we both tell the story. Where would you like people to start to learn more about what you're doing and see some of that Ansel Adams footage beyond what we showed in this piece?
If you go to YouTube, Marc Silber, MarCsilber, you'll find it, or Silber Studios, either one. And you'll come up with our channel, and there's a lot of videos in there. And they're broken into different playlists. So there's one on Ansel Adams. There's a whole bunch of different playlists, sports photography. So whatever you're interested in, you're probably going to find a video about it. My website, which basically goes along with the videos, is silberstudios.tv, and we'll have that link there, I bet. And if you want to see my Instagram, which is kind of what I play with, I haven't really become a serious Instagrammer until just recently.
Oh.
But I'm having fun with it and enjoying the feedback and seeing what you can do with Instagram. So that's at Marc Silber.
I love the brand. Yeah, Marc Silber everywhere. That's good.
It's pretty simple,
We'll have links to all of those in the post for this show. That's Instagram is interesting, right? Especially now with the short format videos, obviously, but I think Instagram really became more interesting to a lot more photographers when they dropped the restriction of having one-to-one aspect ratio, and now it's whatever your image is, you can actually display that. So
and they're saying they're going to increase the video time to 60 minutes sometime this year.
60
I'm sorry, 60 seconds, not 60 minutes.
Okay.
But from a storytelling, you can do an awful lot more with 60 seconds than 15 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
I find it very hard to squish it down and get anything comprehensible in 15 seconds. But 60 seconds, hey, that's going to be great.
I'm looking forward to that, because that will change things if they do that as well. So. Yeah, if they do that and then allow you to embed those videos, like you can embed tweets in blog posts. If you can embed those, maybe you can just embed the
maybe. I don't know. I've never tried that.
Very interesting. Well, cool. Thanks, Marc. I appreciate your time doing this. We had some scheduling snafus trying to get this interview done, but we finally did it.
We made it happen, and it's great to see you again after all these years, and let's stay in touch.
Likewise. Have a good day, man.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Yep.